In your wonderful book, Sjeme, uništenja, you are talking about geopolitical effect of GMO food. And this is very interesting because you as economist, you can explain better than we agronomists can do this. What is real background of all this movement around GMO?
It goes back to the attempt in the 1920s and the 1930s by a group of very powerful, wealthy families in the United States, in England. They financed, the Rockefeller Foundation financed eugenics, which was a genetically based race science that made the fraudulent claim that certain groups of human beings were superior to others because their genetics were better. And that led directly to the Nazi German race science. And when I say directly, it was the Rockefeller Foundation which created the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Race Biology in the 1920s. Without the money from New York, from the Rockefeller Foundation for eugenics, for race science, the Nazis would not have had years of this false biology to justify their idea of the Aryan supremacy. Well, after the war, it became a little bit unpopular in America to support Nazi race science, so the Rockefeller Foundation and their supporters simply changed the name and called it genetics. And they promoted the same ideology, the same idea of certain human beings superior to others by their genetic makeup or so. And in the 70s, they began two programs. One, they began a conscious policy through the United States government. Henry Kissinger was their person in Washington at that time. He came from the circles of the Rockefeller Foundation to Washington. Henry Kissinger drafted a document, NSSM 200, which made it official. This was a top secret document at that time. It was later declassified in 1990, almost 25 years later, by the initiative of organizations connected with the Catholic Church. The document NSSM 200 made population reduction official policy of the United States government, and the argument was, in many developing countries, in the context of the Cold War, the struggle or the supply of strategic raw materials for the United States war economy, and then they broadened it to the United States economy in general, was so important that the danger was these countries, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and so forth, that they have a high birth rate, Congo or places like that in Africa. They have a high population fertility, population increase, and that could theoretically lead, Kissinger argued, to a situation where that large population would demand a larger share of the national resources for their own economic development. Well, that's a perfectly normal and justifiable thing. What the NSSM 200 argued, and this was a landmark change for the United States, is that population growth must be aborted, must be reduced. The number of people on the planet must be reduced. So they began very quietly funding all sorts of programs, forced sterilization in places like Puerto Rico, where the women in the countryside had no idea what was happening when they were taken into clinics to have their children, and they come out sterilized for life. And the Rockefeller Foundation, John D. Rockefeller's Population Council, began financing these programs already in the 1950s, especially into the 60s and the 1970s. And they created a mythology of overpopulation. Well, the danger today is rather one of underpopulation. The whole parts of Africa in population density have less population per capita, per hectare, than does Western Europe. So there is not a danger of overpopulation in Africa. There's a maldistribution of resources for the healthy development of the population there. But this goes back to this kind of wrong organization of global resources in the hands of private corporations who aren't really concerned with human welfare, but rather with control. And the agenda of GMO is really the agenda of control. An interesting quote which I use as the leitmotif of Seeds of Destruction is attributed to Kissinger when he was Secretary of State and of National Security in the mid-1970s. At that time, he had played a very pivotal role in the first oil shock and was in the middle of a major transformation of the world grain trade through his trade deals with Russia. And Kissinger at that time said, if you control the energy, the oil, you control a nation or a country. If you control the food, you control the people. And the United States policy and the policy of these private, powerful families, which have much more influence in Washington than most people outside the U.S. can imagine, they systematically have been working toward global control of oil and of food. And GMO is the control of food.
Thank you for this explanation. But I would like to ask you one more question. When I'm talking, when I had a lecture about GMO, the very often question was about science and scientific progress. My colleagues very often said, what if we will stop with research, what will be with scientific progress? Can you explain me what is your feeling about science and scientific progress?
This is a word that has become extremely dangerous. The idea of progress as an abstraction is a weapon used by powerful people, powerful interests who want to control misusing science. Science is not abstract. Science is not without human content. Science comes from the Latin scientia, to know what and for what goal. And that we must always ask that as scientists, as political scientists, as researchers, as ordinary human beings. Knowledge for what goal, for whom, how do we want to use that knowledge? The idea of progress has been raised almost to the status of being a god in today's culture, that we dare not say something against the God of progress. And often hiding behind the gown of the gods of progress are very malicious and harmful programs, which in the short term may benefit a tiny clique of powerful families and financial interests, but in the long term are destructive to human health and welfare. So the idea of progress, I think, when I hear that word, I get a chill down my back, because I say, what's going to come next? It has to be concrete. What progress for whom? In what way? In what way is GMO a progress for the human race? No, I'm not at all a leveler or an anti-science person, but science must serve mankind, not the other way around. I think the recent comments of the Pope, Benedict XVI, about genetic engineering and the scientists who think they can play God but aren't. I think that is a very accurate description of the problem of this abstract science as a God in itself. It isn't, and we shouldn't consider it so. That's a way of stopping our responsibility as human beings.
Professor Engdahl, thank you very much for your time and your nice explanation. But people who wants to know more, I can say they can find all necessary explanation and information in the book Sjeme, uništenja. Thank you very much.